So what I mean, especially in the last few years, there's been a lot of infighting at the Conservative Party between the right, the One Nation Conservatives, and the more liberal. I'm making distinctions, but I think the more liberal kind of Conservatives keep battling out to see what is the Conservative vision? What is the Conservative vision for the country? I'm kind of curious to see where do you see yourself in terms of those parameters?
Well, I think all political parties do this. There's been plenty of infighting in all of them.
The ones in government.
I definitely don't think that it's only the Conservative Party that disagree with each other. And I also, by the way, think the disagreement to a certain extent is healthy. It's a bit bizarre, but I've been reading a book on modern Catholic theology recently. And one of the things they talk about is the distinction between types of heretical view. And within Catholicism, there is this distinction between...
heretical?
Heresy. How do you just want to define heresy? Things that are against the doctrine of the Church.
Okay.
They're like untruths, religious untruths. Mm-hmm. And there are sort of heresies that are what they call unnatural, which are as a result of sin and deliberate bad things. And there are natural ones, which is even the saints would disagree. Because at some point, even the saints would disagree with each other about things because there is no, the truth has not been fully revealed. And people often say the Conservative Party is a broad church, and I think there's an analogy there. There are sort of natural heresies, maybe, or like natural disagreements where even a perfectly functioning political party would disagree about stuff. And I think that's a good part of the democratic process. And I think that politics is richer for it. But what you ask is, obviously, it is a broad church, and there are a bunch of different views about things. And you're also right that when you're in government, those differences tend to get magnified quite a lot because people like to focus on them because it's more interesting news to talk about where people are disagreeing than where they agree. But what's the core? I think the core of the Conservative Party and the core of conservatism is an idea that people make better decisions about their lives than governments do.
Okay.
And I think that everybody who is within the Conservative Party would share that view. And we would apply it in slightly different ways to different topics, and we would draw bounds about it slightly differently. All of us would. But we all fundamentally believe that you as a person are better placed to make a decision about your life than a bureaucrat somewhere in central government is.
I'm going to relay a quote to you by William Gladstone, former Prime Minister. Liberalism is the trust of the people tempered by prudence. Conservatism is the distrust of people tempered by fear. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I mean, William Gladstone was a Liberal Prime Minister.
Yes.
So he was obviously drawing a distinction that was favourable in one direction rather than the other.
But is there an inch of truth in what William Gladstone has said?
No, I think it's the exact opposite. And that was A, said by somebody with an obvious particular political bias, and B, said in a very different time. Mm-hmm. I think it's the exact opposite. I think conservatism is about a trust in people. Right? The whole point of conservatism is trusting in people to make better decisions than the government would. And the whole point of socialism, social democracy, whatever, is to say, no, that needs to be tempered. What we need is a state to come in and make decisions and constrain the decisions that individuals can. Now, of course, conservatives also believe in the rule of law and having some constraint to individual decision making. But we start off by saying, the burden is upon the state to prove why it needs to intervene. But unless it can prove that it has to, individuals should be able to make decisions for themselves. And socialism, social democracy starts on another end of the spectrum, which is saying, well, actually, the state's going to make some of these decisions and they'll make them better than people will.
I see. Do you think the Conservative Party in the last 13, 14 years has lived up to those ideals? Especially in the context of we're the highest tax burden in history. Yes, we've had the pandemic, and Brexit as well has an impact on that. But do you think they've lived up to these values across their time in government?
I think any government would look back at the end of its time in office with hindsight and say there are things that they wish they'd done differently. And it would be dishonest, I think, of anybody in this government to pretend that there haven't been things that we would have done differently with the benefit of hindsight. Why is the tax burden where it is? Right, the tax burden is where it is because we have a state that has a public sector that has built into it the fact that it is going to become ever more expensive, right? That is just a demographic fact. The way to temper that has to be for us to have an economy that is growing faster than the bill of more expensive more expensive things for people in terms of what the state is providing, and more people who are depending on them because we have an aging population. And so the number of working age people to every non-working age person is just continuing to decline, right? So the only way of us not having a continually increasing tax burden is to be generating the economic growth to get out of that. And the Centre for Policy Studies did their estimate on that recently, and they said that's about 2.9% a year is what we need to be able to keep up with the demographics. So I don't think that it's a point about principles that has led to the tax burden being where it is. I don't think that is a state versus individual choice, because those parameters haven't really moved very much. Now, I would like to see them in a different place to where they are, but I don't think they've really moved very much over the last 13 years. What has moved is just a continual demographic shift towards us having a state where it is going to be more and more expensive to keep up the social contract that people are expecting. So either you have to move the social contract, which is not what I'm advocating for, or you have to generate a more prosperous economy that is able to fund that social contract, which is what I'm advocating for.